Excuse me, ma'am. My daughter noticed it's your birthday. Would it be all right if we joined you? The woman in the wheelchair looked up, her pale blue eyes flickering with something between disbelief and desperate hope. Before her sat a small store-bought cake with a single candle, its flame trembling in the September breeze. The park was empty except for the three of them, a 35-year-old man with exhaustion carved into his face, a 7-year-old girl with a gap-toothed smile, and an 80-year-old woman who'd been invisible for so long she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be seen. "You want to sit with me?" Her voice cracked on the last word. The little girl nodded eagerly, already moving toward the picnic table. Nobody should be alone on their birthday. What none of them knew was that this single moment, this simple question, would change everything. Because sometimes the family you need finds you in the most unexpected places. And sometimes the people who save you are the ones you end up saving in return. Before we continue, please tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel.
Henry Wilson's hand hovered over his daughter's shoulder as they stood at the edge of the small park on Maple and Fifth. They'd been heading to the ice cream parlor, one scoop, a rare indulgence he couldn't really afford but couldn't deny her either. Not today. Not when Emerald had been seizure-free for nearly 2 weeks, her longest stretch in months. But now they stood frozen, watching an elderly woman celebrate her birthday alone. "Please, Daddy," Emerald whispered, tugging his sleeve. "She looks so sad." Henry felt something twist in his chest. He was tired, bone-deep, soul-crushing tired. The kind that came from working 3 jobs and sleeping in 4-hour increments. The kind that came from carrying a number in your head like a death sentence, $47,000. That's what separated his daughter from the surgery that could stop her seizures, from a normal childhood, from a future that he terrified him every single day. But looking at that woman, her carefully styled silver hair, the cardigan she wore despite the warmth, the wheelchair positioned just so at the end of the picnic table, he recognized something familiar. Loneliness. The kind that makes significant moments feel hollow. The kind that he'd felt in hospital waiting rooms at 3 a.m, watching Emerald's small chest rise and fall, wondering if he was enough. "All right," he heard himself say, "let's go say happy birthday." Emerald's face lit up, and she was already pulling him across the street before he could second-guess the decision. As they approached, the woman's head lifted. Up close, Henry could see the sharp intelligence in her eyes, the weariness that had nothing to do with age, and something else, a bone-deep loneliness that seemed to radiate outward like ripples on still water. "Excuse me, ma'am," Henry said, suddenly feeling awkward, intrusive. "My daughter noticed it's your birthday. We were wondering, would it be all right if we joined you for a moment?" The woman's expression shifted through a dozen emotions in the span of seconds: surprise, confusion, suspicion, and finally something that looked dangerously close to tears, before settling into cautious hope. "You want to sit with me?" she repeated, as if the concept were foreign. "If that's okay," Henry said gently, crouching slightly so he was at eye level with her. "Nobody should be alone on their birthday." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "I'm 80 today." "80!" Emerald exclaimed, bouncing on her toes. "That's really, really old. I'm only 7. "Emerald," Henry started, but the woman laughed. It was a rusty sound, as if she hadn't used it in a while, and it transformed her face entirely. "It's quite all right. It is rather old." She studied them both with those sharp blue eyes, and Henry could see her trying to understand why they were there, what they wanted from her. "My name is Stella. Stella Godfrey. And yes, I would like that very much. If you'd really like to stay." "We would," Henry said, and he meant it. They sat down, and Henry helped Emerald cut the cake while Stella watched with an expression of profound wonder, as if witnessing something miraculous rather than mundane. The cake was simple, vanilla, store-bought, but it was good. Emerald chattered between bites about her school, her teacher, Mrs. Anderson, her collection of smooth rocks she'd found in various parking lots around town. "This one's my favorite," she said, pulling a small gray stone from her pocket. "See how it's shaped like a heart?" Stella took the rock carefully, turning it over in her weathered hands. "It's beautiful. You have a good eye."
Daddy works 3 jobs, Emerald announced proudly, oblivious to the way Henry's shoulders tensed. He's the hardest working person in the whole world. He washes dishes in the morning, works at the hardware store in the afternoon, and does computer stuff at night after I go to bed. Henry felt heat creep up his neck. I'm sure Miss Stella doesn't need to hear about—" "Please," Stella interrupted softly, and there was something in her voice, a hunger that had nothing to do with food or cake or anything physical. "I'd like to hear, if you don't mind sharing." Henry hesitated, then found himself talking. Carefully editing the harder parts, he explained that it was just him and Emerald, that they were saving for something important, that he did what needed to be done. "Her mother?" asked Stella quietly, glancing at Emerald, who was now distracted by a butterfly landing on the table. "Died when Em was 2, Henry said. The lie was smooth because he'd told it so many times. The truth, that Emerald's mother had walked out 3 days after the seizure diagnosis, unable to handle a sick child, felt too heavy to share with a stranger." Stella nodded slowly, understanding in her eyes. "And you? What are you built for?" Henry looked at his daughter, at the gap-toothed smile and the bright eyes and the small hands that reached for his when she was scared. "Her," he said simply. "Whatever she needs, I'll find a way." Something shifted in Stella's expression, recognition, perhaps, or respect. She was quiet for a moment, then spoke. "I spent 40 years as a nurse, pediatric ward mostly. I understand what it means to fight for children." The conversation flowed more easily after that. Stella told them about her career at St. Augustine's Hospital, about the countless children she'd cared for, about the nights she'd held frightened parents' hands while their babies fought for life. "I never married," she said, gazing past them at the oak tree's leaves. "Never had children of my own. I told myself I was too busy, that the work was too important. The truth is, I was afraid. Afraid I'd fail them somehow." "But you helped so many people," Emerald said, having tuned back into the conversation. "I did," Stella agreed, "but I helped them at arm's length. I took care of other people's children, my nieces and nephews when my siblings struggled, the patients in my ward, but I never let them close enough to really know me. And when you do that," she trailed off, her gaze distant, "when you touch lives without letting them touch you back, you end up alone." Henry felt something resonate in those words. He'd been so focused on survival, on working and saving and keeping Emerald safe, that he'd forgotten what it felt like to just exist, to sit in a park on a Saturday afternoon and talk to someone without watching the clock, without calculating how many hours until his next shift. "What about your family?" he asked. "Your nieces and nephews?" Stella's smile turned sad. "They visited at first, after the accident." "Accident?" She gestured to the wheelchair. 40 years ago, a delivery truck ran a stop sign. One moment I was crossing the street after a 70-hour week. The next, I was in the hospital where I'd worked, watching my colleagues take care of me instead. The spinal injury was permanent. Suddenly, I couldn't work anymore, couldn't be useful. And my savings? Well, medical care isn't cheap, even for nurses." She paused, her fingers tracing the edge of her cake plate. "My family visited at first, but life moves on, doesn't it? They had their own children to raise, their own problems to solve. I'd spent so much time working that I'd never made close friends, never built a life outside the hospital. So when I couldn't work anymore—" She left the sentence unfinished, but Henry heard what she didn't say. When she couldn't be useful, people moved on. Emerald, with the emotional intuition children sometimes possess, reached over and placed her small hand on Stella's arm. "We won't forget you, will we, Daddy?" Henry met Stella's eyes and saw naked hope warring with self-protection, the look of someone who'd been disappointed too many times to trust easily. But there was also something else, a desperate wish to believe, just this once, that things could be different. No, Princess, he said quietly. We won't.
The following Saturday, Emerald insisted they visit Miss Stella again. Henry had tried to explain that maybe it had been a one-time thing, that they shouldn't intrude, but his daughter was persistent in the way only 7-year-olds can be. We promised, Daddy. We said we wouldn't forget her. So they went back to the park, this time with a small bouquet of flowers from the discount grocery store. Daisies, because they were Emerald's favorite, and they were $3 instead of $15. Stella was there, sitting in the same spot as if she'd been waiting, and the way her face transformed when she saw them made Henry's throat tight. You came back, she said, and there was wonder in her voice. Of course we did, Emerald said, presenting the flowers with a flourish. We brought you these. That visit turned into the next Saturday, and the one after that. By the 4th week, it had become routine. Stella gave her address, a modest apartment building 6 blocks away, and invited them over. Henry accepted, ignoring the voice in his head that said he didn't have time for this, that every hour not working was an hour further from that $47,000 goal. But when he saw how Emerald lit up around Stella, how she laughed and talked and forgot to be sick for a few hours, he couldn't bring himself to stop. Stella's apartment was small, but meticulously maintained, filled with books and photographs of other people's children. The nieces and nephews who'd grown up and moved away, the patients she'd cared for decades ago, their faces frozen in time even as they'd grown up into adults she'd never meet.
She never complained about loneliness directly, but Henry saw it. On the way she lit up when they arrived, in how she carefully set out cookies she'd ordered special, remembering that Emerald liked chocolate chips, in the gentle way she listened to his daughter's endless stories about school and friends and the chapter book she was reading. One afternoon, while Emerald napped on Stella's couch, exhausted from an unusually energetic morning, they sat at the small kitchen table with lukewarm coffee. The apartment was quiet, except for Emerald's soft breathing and the distant hum of traffic. I never had my own, Stella said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Children, I mean. I told myself I wasn't strong enough, that I'd already given so much of myself to others that there wasn't enough left for a child of my own. Henry, who'd been folding the blanket over his sleeping daughter, paused. The truth was, I was afraid, Stella continued, staring into her coffee cup. Afraid I'd fail them the way I'd felt I'd failed myself. I worked 70-hour weeks for 40 years. I told myself I was too busy for friendships, for relationships, for a life outside the hospital. The accident taught me the price of that choice. She looked up, and Henry saw tears gathering in those pale blue eyes. When I couldn't work anymore, when I couldn't be useful, I discovered that everyone already had their own lives established. My siblings had their families. My nieces and nephews were grown. The colleagues I'd worked with had retired or moved on. I'd never built anything for myself. I'd never let anyone close enough to stay when things got hard. You're building something now, with us, Henry said quietly. Stella's hands trembled around her cup.
Family isn't always earned, Stella. Sometimes it's just chosen. And we choose you. The words seemed to break something in her, and she cried quietly while Henry sat beside her, this stranger who'd become something more, and led her. The visits became the anchor point of their weeks. Emerald started spending Saturday nights at Stella's apartment, the two of them watching old movies and playing card games. Stella taught her to knit, and Emerald made lopsided scarves with fierce determination and an excess of dropped stitches. Henry would pick her up Sunday mornings and they'd have breakfast together, the three of them, an accidental family built from mutual loneliness and genuine affection. Stella made pancakes from scratch, and Emerald told stories about the movies they'd watched, and Henry let himself pretend, just for an hour or two, that life could always be this simple. He never told Stella the full extent of their financial struggles, never mentioned that he was living on 4 hours of sleep and that his hands shook from exhaustion by the end of his data entry shifts, never explained that the number, 47,000, haunted him like a ghost, always there in the back of his mind, counting down to a deadline he couldn't afford to miss.
And Stella never mentioned the portfolio of investments she'd carefully built over decades of frugal living. Never spoke of the accounts that had grown steadily while she sat alone in her apartment, planning to donate everything to charity when she died because she had no one to give it to while living. They existed in a space of mutual respect and care that didn't require disclosure of assets or debts. They simply were, together, and that was enough. Until it wasn't. Sit tight, because this story is about to take a turn that neither Henry nor Stella saw coming, and you won't want to miss what happens next. The collapse came on a Tuesday night in February, 5 months after that first birthday in the park. Henry was halfway through his data entry shift, his eyes burning from staring at spreadsheets, when his phone rang. The number was Emerald's school, and his heart dropped before he even answered. "Mr. Wilson?" The school nurse's voice was tight with controlled panic. "It's Emerald. She had a seizure, a prolonged one. We've called an ambulance. They're taking her to Mercy General." The rest of the conversation was white noise. Henry was already moving, grabbing his jacket, his hands numb and clumsy. The drive to the hospital was a blur of red lights and intersections that seemed to multiply, stretching the 6-mile distance into an eternity. The hospital smell hit him like a physical force when he walked through the emergency room doors. Antiseptic and fear and too many memories. Emerald lay small and pale in a bed, surrounded by machines, electrodes dotting her head like strange flowers, monitors beeping their steady, terrifying rhythm. "Daddy?" Her voice was weak, frightened. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." He took her hand, felt how small it was in his. How fragile.
The doctor, Dr. Patel, young and kind-eyed, pulled him aside after the initial examination. Her words were professional but grave, and Henry felt each one like a physical blow. "The seizures are escalating in frequency and duration. The medication isn't working anymore. We need to operate soon, within the month, or we're looking at potential permanent brain damage. I know we've discussed this before, but the timeline has moved up significantly." "How soon?" Henry asked, though he already knew the answer would be impossible. 2 weeks, 3 at the absolute most. 2 weeks. Henry had $31,000 saved, $16,000 short of what he needed, even with his credit cards maxed out and every possible corner cut. The math didn't work. It had never worked. But he'd told himself he had time. Time to work more shifts, time to figure something out, time to perform whatever miracle would save his daughter. But time had just run out. He sat in the plastic chair beside Emerald's bed, holding her limp hand, and felt the weight of impossibility crushing his chest. Around them, the hospital moved with practiced efficiency, nurses checking vitals, doctors making rounds, machines beeping their mechanical lullabies. Life-saving care was happening all around him, and he couldn't afford it for his own child. "Daddy?" Emerald's voice pulled him back. "Am I going to be okay?" He forced a smile he didn't feel, the muscles of his face protesting the lie. "Of course, baby. You're going to be just fine." "You promise?" The lie tasted like ash. "I promise."
But when she drifted back to sleep, sedated and small against the white sheets, Henry put his head in his hands and let himself break in the way he never allowed when she could see. His shoulders shook with silent sobs, his breath coming in ragged gasps he tried to muffle. How could he promise something he couldn't deliver? How could he save her when the math simply didn't work? What kind of father was he that he couldn't— His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text message. "Stella, Emerald missed our movie night. Is everything okay?" Henry stared at the screen, at the simple question that carried so much concern, and something in him broke further. His fingers trembled as he typed back, not the carefully edited version he usually offered, but the truth, all of it. The seizures that had stolen his daughter's childhood since she was 4, the surgery that could fix it, the impossible number, $47,000. The $31,000 he'd scraped together through 3 years of 70-hour weeks and no life and constant grinding exhaustion. the deadline that was now speeding toward them like a freight train with no brakes. He didn't mean to burden her with it. He just needed someone to know that he was terrified, that he was failing his daughter, that he didn't know what to do. Her response came within seconds. Which hospital? Henry blinked at the screen, confusion cutting through his despair. Mercy General. But Stella, you don't have to. I'm coming. Stella, really, it's late, and... He started typing, but she was already responding. You chose me as family. Let me choose you back.
Henry sat there in the harsh, fluorescent lighting of the hospital room, holding his phone, and felt something shift in his chest. Not hope exactly. Hope felt too dangerous, too much like setting himself up for another fall, but something close to it. Something that felt like not being completely alone. Stella arrived within the hour, maneuvering her wheelchair through the hospital corridors with the practiced ease of someone who'd worked in these buildings for decades. She didn't ask questions, didn't offer empty platitudes. She just sat beside him in the waiting area outside Emerald's room and placed her hand over his. They sat like that in silence, and somehow it was exactly what Henry needed. When Emerald woke again an hour later, Stella was there, and the girl's face lit up despite everything. "Miss Stella, you came!" "Of course I came, darling. Where else would I be?" They spent 3 days in the hospital before Emerald was cleared to go home with strict instructions about medication adjustments and monitoring. The surgery date was set, March 15th, 19 days away. Each day that passed felt like a countdown to something Henry couldn't prevent, couldn't fix, couldn't survive. He threw himself into extra shifts with desperate energy, barely sleeping, eating only when his hands shook too badly to function. He picked up whatever work he could find, moving jobs on weekends, delivery gigs between his regular shifts. The number climbed slowly. 32,000, 33,000, 34,000. Still not enough. Never enough.
Emerald seemed to sense his desperation and became quieter, more careful, as if trying to make herself smaller and less expensive. It broke something in Henry every time he saw her hesitate to ask for anything, even things she needed. Stella visited every other day, bringing books and puzzles, sitting with Emerald while Henry worked his afternoon shift at the hardware store. She never asked about the surgery directly, never pushed for details he wasn't ready to share fully, but Henry knew she understood, knew she saw the shadows under his eyes, the way his hands trembled when he thought no one was watching. The night before the surgery, Henry was sitting at his kitchen table at midnight, staring at his bank statement for the 100th time, trying to make $36,000 somehow equal $47,000 through sheer force of will. His phone rang, an unknown number. "Mr. Wilson, this is Carol from Mercy General's billing department. I'm calling about your daughter's surgery scheduled for tomorrow." Henry's stomach dropped. They'd found out he couldn't pay. They were going to cancel. They were going to... "There's been a... Well, I'm not sure how to explain this," Carol continued, sounding genuinely confused. "But your account shows a zero balance. The surgery has been paid in full. All of it. The procedure, the hospital stay, the post-operative care, everything." Henry's hands went numb. The phone nearly slipped from his grip. "What? That's not... There must be a mistake." "There's no mistake, sir. Someone contacted us directly this afternoon and covered the full cost. The payment has been processed and confirmed." "Who?" Henry's voice came out strangled. "Who paid it?" "I'm sorry, Mr. Wilson. The donor requested anonymity. I'm not authorized to release that information." But Henry knew. Even before he hung up, even before he pulled up Stella's contact and called her with shaking hands, he knew.
She answered on the second ring. "Henry? What did you do?" His voice was shaking, tears streaming down his face. "Stella, what did you do?" There was a long pause. When she spoke, her voice was steady but thick with emotion. "I did what family does. I took care of someone I love. Stella, I can't. That's too much. I can't accept." "Henry Wilson, listen to me." Her voice shifted, becoming steel wrapped in velvet. I have spent 40 years watching money accumulate in accounts, planning to give it all away when I die because I had no one to give it to while living. Do you understand what that means? I was going to die alone, and my only legacy would be a donation to institutions that wouldn't remember my name a month after the check cleared. She took a breath, and Henry could hear her fighting tears. You and Emerald gave me something I'd stopped believing in. You gave me purpose. You gave me today instead of someday. You gave me a reason to wake up in the morning and a reason to care about tomorrow. Every Saturday, every story, every time Emerald falls asleep on my couch and you cover her with a blanket, that's what I was saving for without knowing it. That's what the money was for. Let me do this, please.
I don't know how to repay. You already have, Stella said firmly. Every Saturday, every time you include me in your family photos, every time Emerald calls me Grandma Stella and you don't correct her, that's the payment. That's everything. And besides, I have a vested interest in this surgery succeeding. I expect to see that girl grow up healthy. I want to be there when she graduates high school, when she gets into college, when she achieves all those dreams she talks about. You're not taking from me, Henry. You're giving me a future to look forward to. You're giving me a reason to be here. Don't rob an old woman of that. Henry couldn't speak through the tears, could only nod even though she couldn't see him. Now go get some sleep, Stella said, her voice warm. Tomorrow's a big day. I'll be at the hospital by 7. We'll get through this together, like family does. If this story is touching your heart, let us know in the comments below. And stay with us, because what happens next will remind you why showing up for people matters.
6 hours of Henry sitting in the surgical waiting area, his leg bouncing uncontrollably, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles turned white. Stella sat beside him the entire time, her hand occasionally touching his arm, reminding him he wasn't alone. They didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say. The waiting room slowly filled and emptied with other families, other crises, other vigils. A woman in her 60s crying quietly while her husband held her. A young couple clutching hands and whispering prayers. An elderly man alone in the corner, staring at nothing. Henry tried not to think about what was happening beyond those double doors. Tried not to imagine Emerald small and unconscious on a table, her skull open, surgeons' hands working on the intricate pathways of her brain. Tried not to think about all the things that could go wrong. At hour 4, Stella went to get coffee from the cafeteria. At hour 5, Henry stood and paced, because sitting was impossible, his body needing to move or he'd shatter into pieces. At hour 5.5, he sat back down and put his head in his hands, and Stella just held his shoulder, solid and real and there. When the surgeon finally emerged at hour 6, still in his scrubs, his mask pulled down, Henry couldn't read his expression, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Mr. Wilson, Dr. Patel looked tired, but was that a smile? The surgery went very well. We were able to identify and address the seizure focus. Emerald's in recovery now. She's stable and her vital signs are strong. Henry felt his knees go weak. Stella's hand tightened on his arm, keeping him upright. She'll need to stay in the ICU for monitoring tonight, but if everything continues as we expect, we'll move her to a regular room tomorrow. The next 72 hours are critical, but I'm cautiously optimistic. Can I see her? Give them about 30 minutes to get her settled, then a nurse will come get you. She'll be groggy and won't be able to talk much, but you can sit with her. When they finally let him back, Emerald looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, her head wrapped in white bandages, tubes and wires connecting her to machines that beeped and hummed. But her chest rose and fell steadily, and when Henry took her hand, her fingers squeezed his weakly. "Hey, Princess," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You did so well. I'm so proud of you." Her eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused, but aware. "Daddy?" "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." Stella had been allowed back with him, and she sat on the other side of the bed, her weathered hand gently stroking Emerald's arm. "We're both here, sweetheart, and we're going to be here when you wake up properly. You're going to be just fine."
The recovery was slow but steady. The first few days were the hardest, Emerald in pain, unable to do much beyond sleep and take medication, but gradually she became more alert, more herself.
By day 4, she was complaining about the hospital food and asking for books. By day 7, she was sitting up and trying to teach the nurse her favorite card game. Stella visited every single day, bringing audiobooks and puzzles and small gifts, a stuffed turtle, a set of colored pencils, a journal with a purple cover. She sat beside Emerald's bed and told stories about her nursing days, about the children she'd cared for who'd grown up to be doctors themselves, astronauts, teachers, engineers. There was this one boy, Stella said one afternoon while Henry dozed in the chair by the window, exhausted from another long night. Brian, his name was. He'd been in a terrible accident, broken both legs, and he was so angry about missing his baseball season, angry at everyone. But I'd sit with him during my breaks and we'd talk about baseball stats. And eventually, he started working with the physical therapists. Do you know what he does now? Emerald, still weak but engaged, shook her head. He's an orthopedic surgeon, fixes broken bones for a living. He sent me a card 5 years ago, tracking me down through the hospital just to say thank you. Stella's eyes were distant, remembering. That's the thing about healing. Sometimes the people who help us become the people we aspire to be.
Is that why you became a nurse? Emerald asked. Stella smiled. Someone took care of me once when I was very young, made me feel safe. I wanted to do that for others. Miss Stella, Emerald said, her voice growing thoughtful, why don't you have kids of your own? You'd be such a good mom. Stella was quiet for a long moment. Henry, pretending to still be asleep, felt his chest tighten. I thought I wasn't strong enough, Stella finally said. I thought I'd mess it up somehow. I spent so long being afraid that by the time I realized I'd been wrong, it felt too late. I'd built a life around work and caring for other people's children, and I'd never made space for my own family. It's not too late now, Emerald said with 7-year-old certainty. You have us. Stella's eyes filled with tears. Yes, she whispered. I suppose I do. From his chair, Henry opened his eyes and met Stella's gaze across the room. She smiled at him, and he smiled back, and no words were needed for what passed between them in that moment. You were never alone, that look said. You were always family. Emerald came home 3 weeks after the surgery. The doctors were amazed by her recovery, by how quickly she'd bounced back. The seizures had stopped completely. The medication was working. She'd need follow-up appointments and monitoring, but the prognosis was excellent. Henry took a week off from his jobs, the first time he'd taken time off in 3 years, to be with her. They spent the days watching movies, playing board games, and reading books together. Stella came over every afternoon, bringing homemade soup and cookies, sitting with them in comfortable silence or easy conversation. It felt like breathing after years of drowning.
One evening, after Emerald had fallen asleep on the couch, her head on Stella's lap, Henry spoke quietly. I still can't believe you did that. The surgery. All of it. Stella stroked Emerald's hair gently. I've lived 80 years, Henry. Most of them lonely. I have more money than I could ever spend, saved over decades of working and living frugally because I had nothing else to do with it. Do you know what I was planning to do with it? Henry shook his head. Leave it all to charity, to institutions and organizations that would use it well, I'm sure, but that would never know me, never remember me. I'd die alone, and my money would be my only legacy. She looked down at Emerald's sleeping face. This child, this beautiful, brave girl, and you gave me something worth staying alive for. You gave me a legacy that matters. You let me be part of something real. You're not just part of it, Henry said quietly. You're essential to it. You're family. Then let me act like it, Stella said, firmly. Let me take care of the people I love without guilt or obligation. Let me have this, please. Henry nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that it's never too late to matter. Hit that like button if you believe in the power of chosen family.
The years that followed were marked by ordinary miracles, the kind that don't make headlines but change everything. Emerald's seizures, held at bay by the successful surgery and adjusted medication, faded from frequent to occasional to rare.
By the time she turned 10, she'd gone 8 months without a single episode. By 12, she'd gone 2 years. The doctors called it an excellent outcome. Henry called it a second chance at the childhood his daughter deserved. Freed from the crushing weight of medical debt and the grinding exhaustion of 3 jobs, Henry found stable employment at a software company. Better hours, better pay, health insurance that actually covered things. He started sleeping 6 hours a night instead of 4. Started eating regular meals. Started feeling like a person again instead of just a survival machine. But the Saturday visits never stopped. If anything, they intensified. Emerald became Grandma Stella, without anyone officially deciding it. She was there for Emerald's 8th birthday, her 9th or 10th. She attended school plays where Emerald played a tree, then a townsperson, then finally Juliet in a middle school production of Romeo and Juliet. She taught Emerald to knit better scarves, to make her grandmother's recipe for chocolate chip cookies, to play poker with actual strategy instead of just hope. When Emerald turned 13 and started pulling away from Henry the way teenagers do, testing boundaries and asserting independence, it was Stella who sat with her and listened to complaints about unfair rules and embarrassing dads. Stella who helped her navigate friendship drama and school stress without judgment or lectures. Stella who became the safe place between childhood and adulthood, the grandmother who'd been chosen instead of born.
On Emerald's 15th birthday, Stella gave her a car, used, practical, safe, and taught her to drive in empty parking lots on Sunday mornings when Henry was too nervous to handle it. "Brake gently, dear," Stella said calmly, as Emerald jerked the car to a stop for the 5th time. "Like you're pressing on an eggshell. Don't want to crack it, just want to apply pressure." "I'm never going to get this," Emerald groaned, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles went white. "Yes, you will. You just need practice. Your father learned to drive, and if he can do it, anyone can." "I heard that," Henry called from where he stood at the edge of the parking lot, pretending not to be having a heart attack watching his daughter behind the wheel. Stella winked at Emerald. "He's going to need therapy after this, but that's what fathers do. They worry. It means he loves you." "I know," Emerald said, her voice softening. Then, quieter, "Grandma Stella, thank you for everything." Emerald's eyes filled with tears. "I love you." "I love you too, sweetheart. Now, let's try that turn one more time. Remember, check your mirrors, signal early, slow approach." By the time Emerald entered her junior year of high school, the college brochures started arriving. She'd developed a fascination with medicine, inspired partly by her own experiences and partly by Stella's stories from her nursing days. She spent hours researching programs, talking to counselors, shadowing nurses at the local clinic. "I want to help kids like me," she explained one Saturday afternoon at Stella's apartment, spreading brochures across the coffee table. "Kids who are scared and sick and don't understand what's happening to them. I want to be the person who makes them feel safe." Stella's eyes were bright with pride. "You'll be wonderful at it. You already have the most important quality, empathy. The rest is just learning." Henry watched them together, his daughter at 17, vibrant and healthy and full of dreams, and Stella at 87, more fragile now but no less present, and felt gratitude so profound it was almost painful. These two people, who'd come into each other's lives by accident, had saved each other in ways that went far beyond money or medicine.
When the college acceptance letters arrived in the spring of Emerald's senior year, they all gathered at Stella's apartment to open them together. Stanford, yes. Johns Hopkins, yes. Duke, yes. And finally, the one Emerald wanted most, Columbia, full scholarship, pre-med track with a focus on pediatric neurology. "I got in," Emerald whispered, staring at the letter. Then louder, "I got in! Full ride! I'm going to Columbia!" Henry swept her into a hug, tears streaming down his face. Stella watched from her wheelchair, her own face wet with tears, her hands clasped together. "We need to celebrate," Henry said. "Dinner? That nice restaurant on 5th Street?" "Actually," Emerald said, looking between them, "I want to celebrate where it all started, the park, the picnic table, where we first met." So they went to the small park on Maple and 5th on a warm May evening. They sat at the same weathered picnic table where a 35-year-old single father had asked a lonely 80-year-old woman if he and his daughter could join her birthday celebration. The oak tree was fuller now, its branches heavy with spring leaves. The bench where they'd first noticed Stella had been repainted. Stella had insisted on bringing a cake, chocolate this time, Emerald's favorite, and they lit candles that flickered in the gentle breeze. "Look at you," Stella whispered, holding Emerald's face in her weathered hands. "My brilliant girl, going out to save the world. Because you showed me how. You and Dad. You showed me that the most important thing is showing up, being there, choosing to care even when it's hard." "Especially when it's hard," Stella agreed. They ate cake as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Families played in the park around them, children on swings, parents pushing strollers, teenagers tossing a frisbee. Life happening all around them, beautiful and ordinary and sacred. "This," Stella said quietly, watching the sunset, "this is what I always wanted. Not the things I bought, not the money I saved. This, being part of something that continues after I'm gone. Being someone's person, mattering to someone beyond what I could do for them." "Don't talk like that," Henry said, but gently. "I'm 87, dear. I'm allowed to acknowledge mortality." She squeezed his hand. "I'm not afraid. I got my miracle. I got to matter to someone. I got to watch this beautiful girl grow up. I got to be Grandma Stella instead of just Stella. That's more than most people receive in a lifetime." Emerald leaned her head on Stella's shoulder. "You're going to be at my graduation, right? From medical school? That's 8 years away. You have to be there." Stella smiled, stroking her hair. "I'll do my very best, sweetheart. I promise."
Summer passed in a blur of preparation. Shopping for dorm supplies, endless lists of things Emerald would need, emotional conversations about independence and staying safe and calling home. Stella helped with everything, insisting on buying the expensive textbooks, making sure Emerald had warm clothes for New York winters, slipping money into her wallet when she thought no one was looking. The week before Emerald left for Columbia, they threw a small going-away party at Stella's apartment. Just the three of them and a handful of neighbors who'd been pulled into their orbit over the years. Mrs. Sylvia from downstairs who'd taught Emerald to make dumplings. Mr. Veronica from across the hall who'd helped Henry fix his car more times than he could count. A young couple from 3B with their toddler who called Stella great-grandma. It was small and warm and perfect. That night, after everyone had left and they were cleaning up, Stella pulled out a small box. "I want you to have this," she said, handing it to Emerald. Inside was a delicate silver necklace with a small pendant, a stethoscope intertwined with a heart. "I ordered it custom. The heart is for caring, the stethoscope is for healing. But they're intertwined because you can't have one without the other. Real healing requires real caring. Remember that when medical school gets hard and the textbooks make you forget why you started." Emerald put it on immediately, tears streaming down her face. "I'll wear it every day, I promise." "And this," Stella said, handing Henry a thick envelope, "is for both of you. Don't open it now. Open it later, when you're home. Just trust me." He tried to refuse, but Stella's look stopped him. "Please, let me do this." So he took the envelope and they finished cleaning, and he pushed Stella's wheelchair back to her bedroom while Emerald washed the last dishes. It was comfortable and familiar, and felt like it would last forever. It didn't.
Stella's 90th birthday fell on a Saturday in late September, exactly 10 years after that first meeting in the park. They planned the party for weeks. Henry, Emerald, home from college for the weekend, and the small community that had formed around their unlikely family. Nothing fancy, just cake and stories and laughter in Stella's apartment, surrounded by a decade of accumulated photographs. Emerald at 8, 9, 12, 15, 18. Henry and Stella at various ages, growing older together. Birthday parties and graduations and ordinary Tuesday afternoons that someone had thought to document. A life proven real through accumulated moments. Stella was more fragile now. 90 years pressing down on a frame that had already endured so much, but she was radiant, dressed in her favorite lavender cardigan, her silver hair carefully styled, her pale blue eyes still sharp and intelligent. "I can't believe it's been 10 years, she said, as Henry wheeled her to the center of the living room where everyone had gathered. 10 years since a little girl asked her father why an old woman was sitting alone in the park. "Best decision I ever made," Henry said, his voice thick with emotion.
They sang Happy Birthday, off-key and enthusiastic, and Stella closed her eyes to make a wish before blowing out the candles. Emerald asked what she'd wished for, and Stella just smiled and said, "I don't need to wish for anything. I already have everything I wanted." The party wound down as the sun set. Neighbors left with hugs and promises to visit soon. Mrs. Sylvia brought Stella a container of her special soup. Mr. Veronica hugged both Henry and Emerald and told them to take care of our Stella. When it was just the three of them, Stella asked Henry to wheel her to the window. She looked out at the city lights, at the streets below, at the world that had seemed so empty for so long and now felt full. "This," she said quietly, "this is what I always wanted. Not the things I bought, not the money I saved. This! Being part of something that continues after I'm gone. Being someone's person. Having people who choose me, not because they have to, but because they want to." "Grandma Stella!" "Let me finish, sweetheart." Stella reached back and took both their hands. "I'm 90 years old. I'm tired and I'm ready, and that's okay. I've had 10 of the best years of my life because you two showed up. You saw me. You chose me. And I got to be part of your story." "You're not going anywhere," Henry said, but his voice cracked. "Not tonight," Stella agreed. "Tonight I'm right here, exactly where I want to be."
They stayed for another hour, talking and laughing and remembering. Emerald told stories about Columbia, about her classes and her roommate and the overwhelming, exciting chaos of New York. Henry talked about work, about finally having time to breathe, about the photography class he'd started taking. Stella listened to it all with joy radiating from her face. When it was time to leave, Emerald hugged her tight. "I'll call you tomorrow. We can do our Sunday morning video call." "I'd like that," Stella said. Henry helped her into bed, making sure she had water on the nightstand, her medication within reach, her phone charged. "Thank you," she said as he adjusted her pillows, "for everything. For that first day in the park, for every Saturday after, for giving an invisible old woman a reason to keep going." "Thank you," Henry said, his voice breaking, "for saving my daughter, for saving me, for being family when we needed it most." "We saved each other," Stella said simply. "That's what family does." Henry kissed her forehead. "Love you, Stella." "I love you too, both of you, my family."
Stella Godfrey passed away peacefully in her sleep just 2 weeks after turning 90. Mrs. Sylvia found her the next morning, still wearing a gentle smile, after she failed to answer the door for their usual Sunday breakfast. The funeral was small but full. Henry and Emerald, the neighbors who'd become friends, a few elderly colleagues from her nursing days who tracked down the information. The pastor spoke about a life of service, but it was Henry who gave the eulogy that mattered. Stella spent 80 years being invisible, he said, his voice steady despite the tears streaming down his face. She worked herself to exhaustion caring for others, but never let anyone care for her. She saved money for decades with no one to give it to. She touched countless lives, but always at arm's length, afraid to be known, afraid to be loved, afraid to need anyone. He looked at Emerald, who stood beside him, the silver necklace with the stethoscope and heart visible against her black dress. And then, at 80 years old, sitting alone in a park on her birthday, she took a chance. She let 2 strangers sit with her. She let us see her loneliness, her longing, her hope. She let herself be chosen. And in doing so, she chose us back. His voice broke. She saved my daughter's life. She saved mine too, in ways that have nothing to do with money. She taught us that family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about showing up. It's about choosing each other, day after day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Stella got her miracle, Henry continued, not because she died wealthy or because she lived a long life,
but because she spent her last 10 years being seen, being loved, being someone's person. She got to be Grandma Stella instead of just Stella, and we got to be her family. That's the miracle. The lawyer's office was awkward 2 weeks later. Henry, uncomfortable in his one good suit, Emerald red-eyed and hollow beside him. The reading of the will was brief and stunning. 80% of Stella Godfrey's estate to Henry Wilson and Emerald Wilson. The remaining 20% went to St. Augustine's Children's Hospital, where she'd worked for 40 years. The amount made Henry's vision blur. Stella had been wealthy, truly wealthy. Decades of careful investing, of living frugally while money accumulated, planning to give it all away because she had no one to give it to. She left a letter, the lawyer said, sliding an envelope across the desk. Henry's hands shook as he opened it. The handwriting was shaky but clear. Stella's distinctive script that he'd seen on birthday cards and grocery lists and notes left on his windshield.
Dear Henry and Emerald, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. Don't be sad, or rather, be sad for a little while, but then let it go. I died happy. I died loved. I died knowing that I mattered to someone beyond what I could do for them. That's more than most people get. Money is just paper and numbers until you give it purpose. You gave me purpose. You taught me that family isn't about biology or obligation. It's about showing up. It's about choosing each other day after day, not because you have to, but because you want to. I want you to use this to build the life you deserve. Henry, stop worrying so much. Take that photography class you mentioned. Travel somewhere you've always wanted to go. Live a little. You've earned it. Emerald, pursue every dream without the weight of debt holding you back. Become the doctor I know you'll be. Help those kids who need someone to see them, just like you saw me. Live fully. Love fiercely. And when you remember me, don't be sad. Be grateful, as I am grateful. I was invisible for 80 years, and then you saw me. You chose me. You made me family. I died the richest woman in the world because I had something no money could buy. A family who chose me back. Thank you for giving me 10 years of mattering. Thank you for giving me you. All my love, always. Your Grandma Stella. P.S. Emerald, wear that necklace to your medical school graduation. I'll be there in spirit, so proud I could burst.
P.P.S. Henry, that envelope I gave you before Emerald left for college, I hope you kept it. Inside are instructions for my funeral, which you've probably already handled, thank you, but also letters I wrote for both of you. One for each major milestone I might miss. Open them when you need me. I'll still be showing up, even from here. They sat in the lawyer's office holding each other, crying for the woman who'd taught them that loneliness is only permanent if we let it be, that it's never too late to build something real, that sometimes the family we need finds us in the most unexpected places. On the corner of Maple and Fifth, the park still stood. The picnic table where everything began remained, weathered but sturdy. And every year, on Stella's birthday, Henry and Emerald returned with cake and candles. Sometimes it was just the two of them. Sometimes they brought friends, partners, eventually Emerald's own children, Stella's great-grandchildren in spirit, if not in blood. They'd light the candles and sing happy birthday to the woman who'd spent 80 years invisible before finally, beautifully, being seen. They'd tell stories about her, the way she taught Emerald to knit, her terrible jokes, her incredible chocolate chip cookies, the way she'd understood loneliness because she'd lived it and chosen to fight it anyway. And every time, without fail, Henry would look at that picnic table and remember the single most important decision he'd ever made, saying yes when his 7-year-old daughter asked if they could say happy birthday to a stranger.
Because that's when he learned that showing up matters, that choosing people matters, that family isn't about blood or obligation, but about being there, consistently, persistently, lovingly,
until the invisible becomes visible, until strangers become family, until alone becomes together. Stella Godfrey lived 90 years. 80 of them are invisible. But those last 10, she was seen. She was chosen. She was loved. And that made all the difference. If this story touched you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit that like button if you believe in the power of showing up. Subscribe So Lift Stories for more stories that remind us why human connection matters. And remember, it's never too late to matter. It's never too late to be seen. It's never too late to choose a family. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next story.